Folks, today in New York City federal trial, Sean Diddy Combs. He was found guilty on 2 lesser charges of the Mann Act, transportation to engage in prostitution, of Cassandra Ventura. That was count 3. Also on count 5, engaging in prostitution with former girlfriend Jane. That was the pseudonym in which she testified in court. But the more serious charges, count 1, racketeering conspiracy, not guilty. Count 3, first of all, that was count 1. Count 4, that dealt with sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion of former girlfriend Jane. Again, not guilty on that particular charge. Again, 5 total charges. He was found not guilty on 3 of those. The most important one was the RICO one. That was count 1. Again, guilty. First of all, you take count 2, not guilty. That dealt with sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion of Cassandra Ventura. Again, just 2 of those charges. Now, Diddy's lawyer wanted him to be released. They wanted to work out some kind of arrangement. After the verdicts were read, he turned to his family and said, "I'm coming home." Well, no, he's not. The judge ruled he is not going to be released. His sentencing is set for October 3rd. Candace Kelly, legal analyst, was following the trial, was in the courtroom. Jasmine Simpkins, the journalist, was also in the courtroom. They both join us right now. Candace, walk us through what happened today. This jury they reached a decision on 4 of the 5 yesterday. They were deadlocked on 1, came back this morning. Didn't take them long to come to the conclusion. Let's knock out this count 1. And then it was around 10 a.m. we had the decision.
Yeah, Roland, listen, they were in there for about an hour. And that's what happens when you go home and you sleep on something. I think that was the goal. Maybe they went home, said, everybody sleep on it. Let's come back. Let's reconvene. Let's see where we stand. And they stood on this final verdict, which was, as you said, no sex trafficking, no RICO, but the 2 counts of prostitution stuck. So, and this is what happens when you get 12 people into a room from different backgrounds, try to get a decision made. It turned out this way a little earlier than I think a lot of us would have ever imagined, especially since they went home last night. But that verdict is out. And certainly this is something that the defense sees as a win. We haven't gone to sentencing yet. And that's when we will really know, depending upon how much jail time he gets, Roland.
Give us a sense of demeanor. We understand that prior to the jury coming back with the verdict today, Sean Combs asked the U.S. Marshals if he could pray with his family. They allowed that to happen. So walk us through just paint the picture for us, because no cameras were allowed in this federal courtroom.
So listen, there have been a couple of times this week where there have been prayers, circle prayers. He gets to spend quite a bit of time with his family inside the courtroom when everything is wrapped up. But today was really something. When that verdict came, from what I understand, because I was outside and sometimes in the overflow room, when that came, he got down on his knees and he prayed. As the not guilties came, he was pumping that fist in the air until the guilties came. And then he was really had a just sunken shoulders and was very surprised about this. But he believed that this was a win. He kissed Tinny Garagos on her cheek. Everybody came around and was rallying around him and saying, "We won. Dream team, we're a dream team." So there was a lot of excitement in the air. When Janice Combs came out, when I was standing outside, people clapped, people were cheering, people were, as you probably have heard, had body oil and baby oil that they were spraying in the air. There were, more Free Puffy T-shirts. People were dressed to the 9s and the 10s, and this was a big deal. Sean Combs' music was being played, and for those people who were there, whether they were bloggers or whether they were reporters and just caught up in the scene, it was quite a scene to be caught up in for a very long time. Now, they all thought that, of course, hey, if he was not going to have to stay in jail, that he would walk out. I don't know why people were waiting for this shot. That's not how it works. He'd still have to go check out of the detention center. But the bottom line, as you said, is that he didn't get bail anyway. So all he's going to do is going to be waiting until October 3rd, when the sentencing will be happening.
Jasmine, we saw that artistic rendering, if we could pull it up again, of Diddy on his knees, pounding the chair. Take us through that from your vantage point, what you saw. Describe for us what it was like, the jury, the prosecutors, the judge, Diddy, his family, witnesses.
My time in the courtroom and obviously also in the overflow room, we've gotten a chance to see his demeanor, be up and down. Some days he looks a little lethargic, like he was definitely got a little trial fatigue, as I've been calling it. Other days he's a little bit more jovial, laughing, talking to his family. It wasn't shocking, though, especially hearing some of his family members, members of his PR team talk about how he's been very much reading his Bible, reading books about manifestation. So for him to get down on his knees, we know he's been a man, talked about his faith over the years. So that wasn't shocking. And it also isn't shocking to see defendants have a reaction, right, like this when a verdict is called, be it guilty or not, in the courtroom. So I don't think anyone was shocked. His family obviously was still very excited and happy and hoping that the judge would grant him bail, but that did not happen today. But I think he still feels like this is a win. His team feels like this is a win, and they're hoping for the least amount of time when sentencing is handed over on October 3rd.
This, of course, was up and down. I've seen a number of legal analysts rip this prosecution team and simply say, Candace, that their evidence was absolutely weak when it came to the RICO charge.
Well, listen, the RICO charge is something that if you're going to be sitting in a jury, you are going to have to really become like a mini law student. There were 8 underlying charges that they had to understand, of which they had to get 2 over a period of 10 years in order to get to the RICO. I think what's very, very interesting is that there were 2 predicate charges that were reached. That was the sex trafficking. Not sex trafficking, the prostitution, right? We have those 2. I do not think that they really believed in this idea of RICO. There's a real relatability issue and people thinking that this is an overcharge. And why are we going to step into someone's bedroom and decide somebody's private relationship, as they said in the closing arguments, that this was just a modern day love story. And on the prosecution side, yes, many people have said that this was an overcharge. Why RICO? You are telling me that this particular enterprise, as you called it, only existed for the purposes of Sean Combs to carry out these particular acts? Well, when you look at his business, that was at one point worth $1 billion. That's really, really difficult for a lot of people to try to believe and take in. So I think that there were a couple of things that really spoke loudly. And again, one that was the RICO and the relatability. The other thing is you just had the digital footprint. You had so many texts that made it really hard to discern. Was this just 2 lovers that were, that's how they ran their relationship? They were always mad at each other and then making up and then mad at each other and then becoming one, as the defense said, that they became one in all of their decisions. Were they just this couple that's how they, lived out their journey as a couple? So there are a lot of things for the jury to consider. And at the end of the day, they just did not believe the witnesses because had they believed them, they definitely would have gotten the RICO. They did not.
Jasmine, first of all, the scene outside, flat out circus.
It's been that way, though, I would say. I mean, definitely there were days that there was less hubbub outside of the courthouse, but this was par for the course. Listen, from the moment the indictment was handed down, words like freak off, 900 bottles of baby oil, it was very sensational, right? And so I wouldn't have expected less from what we saw over these 7 to 10 weeks. And to see fans outside chanting, he still has a lot of people who believe he should be free. There's a lot of people who believe he should be incarcerated. But to see the fans outside, to hear that people are playing music, the Freako Not Rico t-shirts, the baby oil, to me, it falls in line with the sensationalism that we've seen in this trial since the very beginning.
Attorneys Matt Manning, civil rights attorney out of Corpus Christi, Texas. Also, A. Scott Bolden, attorney out of Washington, D.C. Scott, I want to go to you first. The point that Candace there made, look, they had to make the connection. And then when they had the testimony, those text messages of both women talking about these freak-offs or these sexual escapades, it made their case real difficult to say it was coercion.
Well, the witnesses also had real credibility issues. I mean, some of the witnesses had been abused and went back for more. They voluntarily played in these freak-offs, and so they lacked credibility. And remember, these were all adults. These adults who are participating in this. They really convicted Sean Puffy Combs of being a sexual deviant and having a wild sex life, but they didn't convict him of a crime because it wasn't sexual trafficking. It wasn't RICO because he's got a music business. He didn't need these freak-offs in order to run his music business. And it was hard. You got to also remember, today is July 2nd. The holiday is coming up. They didn't deliberate that long, quite frankly. And so this is a real win for Sean Puffy. Because remember one other thing, too. Your parents will remember the Mann Act because it covered pimps and prostitutes and then black men who were involved with white women coming across the line in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. They used this Mann Act, but he's never been convicted of a crime. Why wouldn't they let him go home on a monitor or with bail? That makes no sense. He's only got two felony charges that'll serve him. He can get 0 to 15 years.
I lost Scott's signal. Matt, your assessment of this jury's verdict and the prosecution's and their of course, their failure, some say, to convict him on the most serious charges that could have gotten him life in prison.
Yeah, I think the last time you and I talked about this, I told you that this is where I thought the jury might really struggle. And I don't know. Obviously, I didn't get a chance to watch the evidence, and I don't know what the jury said if they were asked about their decision after the trial. However, I always thought that the difficulty with this case for the prosecution was it was too nebulous in terms of the RICO. They charged it like it was to, quote, encourage his prestige and his power. But the reason I think that's difficult is because they had to relate it back to the Combs enterprise and the furtherance of the goals of the Combs enterprise. And I just never thought they were going to be able to get there clearly. And I thought the jury might stick on that. I don't know if that's the reason they initially hung up on the RICO charge. But, the not guilties on the 3 that he got doesn't surprise me in terms of how they presented the evidence and also in terms of exactly what Scott was speaking to. I mean, you not only have people who were potentially consensually involved, but you have people who were involved and then left and then came back and, left again. And I think that when you're looking at it from a doubt perspective, the jurors really had to grapple with, is this really in furtherance of some conspiracy, or is this somebody who's just in Mr. Combs's orbit who's going to be staying in his orbit? And I think that's what it was. It was a question probably of whether it was really consensual, whether it was really coercive, and whether people were around him for some other reason than to extend this conspiracy. So I'm not surprised on the RICO charge. And a lot of times what juries do is they try to find some compromise. So there could have been some jurors in that jury room who said, we can't let him go free, on everything. So let's convict him of these 2, transporting for prosecution acts and go with it from there. And jurors are not supposed to do that, but jury deliberations are secretive. And I think that very often happens. People feel like they don't want to let someone go for on everything. And maybe they thought the evidence on those was strong, but clearly they didn't think it was on the other charges. And I'm not surprised by the outcome, particularly with the RICO charge.
I'm going to bring in Rebecca Carruthers as well, but I'm going to go to Jasmine, Candace, and then Rebecca. I have seen lots of women, especially black women, Jasmine, say, look, this is a prime example of women getting screwed, women being abused, men treating them like rag dolls. And so it's been a lot of this that I've seen since this verdict came down this morning. Jasmine, you first.
Yeah, I said this too during another conversation that I think that the Me Too movement in 2017 really created this domino effect where you saw that a lot of women, especially women who've had positions or worked in the music industry, have come forward. And I don't think this will be the last time that we see something of this magnitude happen, perhaps of a man of Sean's stature. Because the reality is that there is a dark underbelly in Hollywood. And we're just now starting to get this reckoning, right? Where people are starting to talk about the things that they've experienced and what's been happening behind closed doors, these casting couches and things of that nature. And so I think that Cassie Ventura, I think her ability to speak up, her pressing charges, even if it was just a civil charge, I think will motivate other women, to speak up about some of the things that they've been experiencing behind closed doors.
Candace, same to you. One of the things that we talked about, that in many ways, this was a domestic violence trial, but that wasn't that wasn't one of the charges.
No, they didn't charge him with that.
Candace?
Right. It wasn't one of the charges, and the statute of limitations had run, and it was a state issue. So yes, that is that. But the reason they brought it up is because on that particular day, they say that when Cassie was being dragged back to that room, there was a freak off that was going off in that room, and there were other people that corroborated her testimony to say that yes, there was a male in there. They were in the middle of a freak off. She was trying to get away, and that's where their coercion would come in. And so that's why when a lot of people talk about that assault video and say, well, why was it even in there? That's why, because the prosecution did a very good job of connecting the dots. But I will say this too, in their closing, the defense, they showed that exact same video after the dragging and showed Cassie in a very calm state talking. And they said, that's the part that you need to look at. Does she look scared? So, you can go back and forth and make your case. That's what good attorneys do. There are a lot of good attorneys here. But when we think about that domestic violence issue, that's why the prosecution brought it in. And like I said, did a very good job.
Rebecca.
I'm struggling with this a bit, especially with some of the rhetoric that I've seen online, the rhetoric that I've heard from associates. Quite frankly, it seems like many in our community don't understand sexual violence and don't understand what monsters look like. And in my opinion, Sean Combs is a monster. My question specifically is about the forensic psychologist, Dr. Don Hughes. Do you all think that she was brought in too early, and maybe she should have been like a summary witness and maybe been like maybe the penultimate witness before the state closed?
Candace, do you want to take that one, or you want me? I think they put on 34 witnesses. They started off strong. In my personal opinion, I think it started to fizzle after a while. You could even see the jurors were bored. I mean, at some points they were yawning, or they had their hand down or their head down. Sean himself had his head down. I mean, these were long days of long testimonies. I don't know if juxtaposing her at a different point would have helped. I just don't think they were buying this idea, as you guys have said, of the RICO. I don't think they were able to connect those dots. It is very difficult, and there's a lot of gray area when it came to his relationships with these women. Jane, in my opinion, was a horrible witness to put on. She did not come off as compassionate as Cassie did, not to mention there were so many inconsistencies in the things that she said. And at the end of it, it sounded like she was more motivated by money than anything else. And I think that was very damaging for the prosecution, having her on the stand. So I don't necessarily know that having her come in earlier would have helped any as it pertained to getting the RICO charge.
Can I jump in for a moment and just say that?
Hold on, Scott. Candace, go ahead.
Listen, there was a real strategy issue in terms of the clock that the prosecution had to think about because Cassie was pregnant. So she had to go first, right? And because of that, they had to put Don Hughes next to her or within 2 or 3 witnesses of her so that they would remember and connect the dots that here's the domestic violence victim. Here's the person who stayed, even though she sent these loving texts and was also, assaulted and said she was raped. Here's someone who now is going to explain that. And because she was early, Cassie, they had to put Don early. So I see your point, and that over 7 weeks, you can forget a lot of that details. What I didn't see as much of as that I would have liked in the closing for the prosecution is making that point that the reason why you're seeing somebody, these women who look absolutely confused. I love him. I don't love him. I was raped. I wasn't raped. Let's make love. I love you. I mean, it was so many text messages that you just wondered. They should have given more credence and put more of Don Hughes in that closing statement in order to drive the point home. If they wanted to make sure that in that deliberation room, they remembered, this is how a victim who is in a position where she is lower in the power chain actually acts.
Scott.
Yeah, real quick, as a former sex crimes prosecutor from New York, having tried several of these cases are tough. You got a sophisticated jury from New York. I'm not saying it's right, but the credibility of the women who are abused and who are taken advantage of, the problem with them having a prior relationship is because prior relationships are imperfect. Love and sex relationships are imperfect, and New Yorkers, as a sophisticated jury, they have their view of the world. These cases aren't going to be perfect as if you're trying them in Kansas, and yet and still, many of these victims will walk away from even going forward with the prosecution. So I applaud these women who went forward, but the evidence and the texts and the lack of credibility, it's just hard to get a conviction, even though they're telling the truth. And they're all telling the truth. It's just that the standard of proving a case beyond a reasonable doubt in the face of their cross-examination and lack of credibility, it makes it really, really tough to get a conviction. Either the standards got to change or the evidence has got to change when women who are abused say, I'm going to go forward. It may be too late to get a conviction.
Final comment from Jasmine, final comment from Candace. Jasmine, you first.
You know, I think that my biggest takeaway from all this is that we don't know what victims of domestic violence looks like. We don't always know what people are going through. I've interviewed Cassie several times over the years, specifically 2 days after she was assaulted by Diddy in that hallway in the Intercontinental Hotel. And to see how she had on a brave face, glistening with bronzer, that they had covered all of her bruises up, a black eye, that she had faced such a horrific evening with this man and still walked the red carpet, talked with such enthusiasm about her film, was hand in hand with him, was a reminder to me that we always don't know what people are going through, but to be compassionate. And also a reminder, as I've said earlier, that we don't really know what's going on behind closed doors, and we can idolize somebody for being a billionaire and for making all these hit records, but we have to remember that they are human, they've got flaws. And this fall from grace, I hope, shows people that there's a lot that we still don't know about the entertainment industry, and I think a lot more that's going to come out very soon.
Candace.
Well, listen, October 3rd will be the day. His attorneys have even proposed about 21 to 27 months based upon the federal sentencing guidelines. We will see. And that's really when we will see what this means. He's going to get 10 months for time served. He may not even be there for that long. What people have been talking about in terms of this being like a hip hop reckoning, and he's the first person to actually go down. You know, people move the culture and the culture moved the people. We are now in not a post-Me Too movement culture, but we are definitely in a different time than when Harvey Weinstein in 2020 was brought up on charges. So we just have to think about how we actually are paying attention to the news, how much we are investing, and how much we understand what we are seeing on TV and writing about it and what's in our algorithm. It is very important for us to understand and make sure that we go to court and that we pay attention. And I'm just at least glad that this particular case has brought attention enough to it so that people are understanding that, listen, RICO is out there. And if he had been convicted, in my opinion, that would have been a terrible precedent, because there are a lot of people who have talked to me about, well, oh my goodness, could that have been me? I did these little things, and I think that might have added up to RICO. You bet your life it probably would have added up to RICO. This would have been a terrible precedent. I am not surprised at the outcome of this particular case.
Jasmine Simpkins, Candace Kelly, great job. Candace, great job updating our viewers of this trial for the past several weeks. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, Roland.
Go to our panel, final topic from each one of you on this particular topic before we go to a break and start talking about the big, ugly, disastrous bill. I'll start with you, Bat.
You know, I'll say two things can be true at the same time. We should support survivors. We should support people coming forward with, you know, their lived experiences. But also our system has to function this way. It's an imperfect system. But when you require unanimity, 12 people in the box have to see if the evidence gets you there to a conviction. Like Scott, I'm a former prosecutor. I've prosecuted these cases and defended them. And this is how the system works. 12 people sat in the box, they heard the evidence, and they determined that the charges weren't met. And that is a separate conversation from the very important conversation about supporting victims and supporting survivors. However, two things can be true at once. And I think that's what people need to take away from this, because the opposite of that is disastrous for particularly us as Black people in the country. Meaning, if you can get accused and convicted on innuendo or supposition or the idea that we're just going to blindly believe complaining witnesses, then we devolve into a state where somebody can make an accusation against you and your liberty is taken away purely on accusation. And that is not how it works. The unanimity of a jury system is a very important check to power. And in this instance, it looks like it worked properly.
Scott, what do they say? Guilty beyond all reasonable doubt.
That's right. I think I agree with all of my colleagues. I do think this is a real message to the government. The government is constantly trying to expand the reach of RICO in other jurisdictions. I'm sorry, in other industries, not just the mafioso. And they've tried to do it with mixed success. And I really think this is a message to them that they need to think long and hard and twice if they're going to bring this type of case in this type of kind of sexual circumstance, because it's tough, because it's a prior relationship. I would urge, I support victims of domestic violence. I prosecuted those cases. And I would just urge those who have been abused to come forward sooner than later. Because sometimes when it's later, there's too much evidence and lacking credibility that makes a case like this allows the prosecutors to get a conviction. These are just facts until either the laws change or the criminal elements change, and they're not changing anytime soon, Roland.
Rebecca?
So I agree with Scott in part. 20 years, I was in law school 20 years ago, and the way RICO was defined then and the way it was carried out then is definitely different than the way it's carried out now, especially as we see different RICO charges against hip hop and rap artists, especially seeing it moving across the South. You know, it's different. But focusing on domestic violence, I believe that the domestic violence statute of limitations ran out here, which is why there wasn't a domestic violence charge. But we also know, I think it's up to 1 out of 3 men are victims of sexual violence. And I think it's almost 1 out of 2, if I remember those numbers correctly, of women are victims of sexual violence. So at some point in this country, look, this is not legal advice that I'm giving, but we also have 2A as well. And so unfortunately, when we see that the criminal legal system doesn't provide the justice for victims of sexual abuse, sexual assault, then that causes people to look at other avenues of looking at justice. So once again, this is not legal advice. I'm not encouraging people to do or not to do whatever, but I also understand why there are some family and some folks who decide to protect their own.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.